Welcome to the second lecture on module 3, where we are focusing on environmental issues and management under the course on HSE in offshore and petroleum engineering under the brace of NPTEL IIT Madras. In the second lecture in module 3, we will talk about the consequences and significances happening in the marine environment, which essentially occurs from one important outcome of drilling, which is oil spills. Let us look at some important facts related to hydrocarbons. Abundant evidence demonstrates global distribution of oil contamination when tests have been conducted to estimate the content of hydrocarbons in marine pollution. Therefore, it is important, friends, to know that concerns about scale and consequences of oil pollution is increasing day by day over to the last decades. Oil spill, therefore, or oil content in the marine environment is one of the leading contributors of impact caused to the marine environment. Crude oil contains some hydrocarbons with hybrid composition, for example, paraffin naphthenic, paraffin aromatic composition, which are hybrid in nature. Their behavior and biological impact in the ecosystems are essentially governed by the physical and physiochemical properties. For example, some of the properties which govern their impact on the ecosystem is essentially based on their specific gravity, the volatility and water solubility. We will see each one of them separately in detail and see what are the consequences occurring from water solubility and volatility of these physical and chemical properties of the system, which causes serious effects on marine pollution. Let us quickly ask the composition of what a crude oil consists of. Differences in properties of oil components actually lead to physical fractionalizing of crude oil in ocean environment. This makes oil to be present in different physical states in the marine pollution. They can occur in the form of surface films, they can be also seen in dissolved forms, can also seen some emulsions, oil in water, water and oil composition, etc. Can also see crude oil as suspended forms, oil aggregates that float on the surface, while oil fractions are absorbed by the suspended particles in the marine environment. Solid and viscous components are deposited usually at the sea bottom, compounds accumulated in the water organisms as well, and chronic pollution of oil is essentially caused by the emulsified oil content present in crude oil. Now the question comes, how do you detect the oil content in marine pollution? Rather, it is very difficult and complex because of certain reasons. One of the main problems of detecting presence of oil content in marine pollution is that the existence of hydrocarbons are similar mostly to that of produced by living organisms and mammals in the sea environment. When oil presence is low and has got a high background concentration, detection becomes much more difficult. The complex process of oil transformation is developed immediately when they come in contact with seawater, and they disperse very fast. Progression, duration and result of these transformations essentially depend on the properties and composition of the oil. Distribution of oil spill, therefore, on the sea surface occurs under the influence of gravitational forces. If you look at a physical review of how oil spill actually takes place, most of the oil components are essentially water soluble to a certain degree, especially low molecular weight aliphatic and aromatic hydrocarbons are water soluble. Hydrodynamic and physical chemical conditions influence the rate of dissolution of oil in surface waters. Chemical transformation of oil on water surface takes place as early as within a day of oil spill. The reaction is oxidative in nature. It involves petrochemical reactions under influence of ultraviolet waves of solar spectrum. If we look at series of environmental impact caused by the oil spill in marine environment, the available data on these studies on seawater levels of hydrocarbons vary in different regions. Friends, it is important for us to know that if we really wanted to measure the marine pollution which caused by oil spill, you must always look at the contents present in the seawater and try to disintegrate them by some chemical reactions to know what are actually the contents contributed by hydrocarbons from the oil spill. But unfortunately, the available data on such tests are showing different results of hydrocarbon content in different regions. Now, there are many factors this influence them. Essentially, the primary factors are the complexity of biochemical and geochemical behavior of these hydrocarbons in water. Therefore, the reports show the tendencies of oil level tend to increase from ocean pelagic region to the enclosed sea, coastal waters and estuaries, which is very dangerous and very precarious situation which bothers the environmentalists in the present state. Marine pollution is generally studied by identifying the following factors: maximum contamination of euphotic layer, patchy distribution of contaminants present on surface water, localization in upper micro layer, deposition in bottom sediments at seabed, increased levels in contact zones, overlapping fields of maximum pollution, and of course one can also study the relative stability of oil flow in the given situation. If you look at hydrocarbon as one of the important toxicant, let us see what are the contents present in hydrocarbon which classifies or qualifies this as a toxicant. The eco-toxicological characteristics of oil is essentially arising from its composition. Oil is an important toxicant due to its integrated nature. It affects every vital function of living organisms. For example, it seriously affects the process system, the mechanism and the reproductive system of a given living mammals. Oil hydrocarbons are more toxic as their molecular structure is actually a straight chain of carbon atoms. Increasing molecular weight increases toxicity. Their concentration is usually measured by a method called biomarker method. This method is an important element of marine monitoring system. It provides data for assessing cumulative biological effects under chronic oil contamination of seawater. From chemical perspective, friends, oil is seen as a complex mixture of many organic substances which is dominated essentially by hydrocarbons. When they come in contact with marine environment, it is quickly separated into fractions. They settle in different forms in sea environment. They can also form surface slicks. They can dissolve and also become a part of suspended substances. They also get disintegrated to form emulsions. Some of them remain as solid and viscous components in the marine environment. Therefore, friends, migration of oil in a biological perspective is a very complex model because of its interconnection processes. They include physical transport, dissolution and emulsification, oxidation, decomposition, sedimentation and of course ultimately the microbial degradation. Because of this interconnectivity between the processes, biological perspective adds complexity to estimate oil spill or oil contamination mathematically in modeling sequences. Oil hydrocarbons are therefore continuously released in marine environment, not necessarily only during accidents, but they also arise from natural oil seepage from the sea floor. Global distribution of oil hydrocarbons is characterized by increasing concentration from the pelagic areas to coastal waters, which is one of the main concern to the environmentalists in the recent past. Some traces of vanadium and compounds of sulfur actually catalyzes even the oxidation process present in the environment, which depletes the dissolved oxygen content in the seawater. Final products of oxidation increase water solubility and toxicity. Examples are hydroperoxides, phenols, carbolic acids, ketones, aldehydes and others. Signs of oil presence in the sea are seen in many forms, ladies and gentlemen. Oil slicks are seen on the surface of a marine environment. Oil deposits have been noticed on the seabed. Tar balls and lumps drifting in the seawater column is also been seen as different measures. Let us look at the contents of hydrocarbons and see what are the factors which influence the toxicity in given marine environment. If you look at oil hydrocarbons, they are actually divided into 4 main groups. The first group is aliphatic, which is containing saturated hydrocarbons which are otherwise called as alkanes or paraffins. The carbon atoms present in this content is about 40 to 50% of volume. The second main group is naphthenes or cycloparaffins, which contains hydrogen atoms about 25 to 75%. The third group is aromatic unsaturated cyclic compound, which of course contains hydrogen atoms in the range of 10 to 20%, and the last group of hydrocarbon is alkenes or olefins, which are nothing but compounds which are a part of crude oil, but they are main product of its cracking in terms of its dissolution and decomposition. This table gives a comprehensive layout of understanding in terms of evaporation and dissolution of petroleum hydrocarbons in the water environment at a simple ambient temperature about 25 degrees Celsius. You can see the content of hydrocarbon varying from pentane to pyrene, the partial pressure presence in terms of Pascal, their solubility in terms of milligram per liter, and the effective time saturation in terms of hours and the TD in terms of hours. There are different hydrocarbon components which are actually a part of evaporation and dissolution process at a specific temperature, which is shown here. Now the content in terms of solubility are high as 40 milligram per liter solubility and as minimum as very low value of 0.05. However, the retention time varies as high as 2000 hours even to a very high value of 5.7 10 power 5 hours. So the presence of these hydrocarbons during the process of evaporation and dissolution stays for a longer time, and solubility is also very high. If you look at the fate and behavior of these hydrocarbon components in the marine environment, there are different stages at which they can be encountered in the marine pollution in the form of physical transport. They can also appear in the form of dissolution, emulsification, oxidation and destruction, sedimentation, microbial degradation and aggression, and lastly self purification. Let us look at different forms of this quickly one by one and try to understand the significant contribution of these stages in the marine pollution. If you look at the physical transport form, it is evident from literature that within 10 minutes of the spill of, let us say, 1 ton of oil, it can disperse over a radius of about 50 meters. So the dispersion is very fast. It immediately forms a thin slick of 10 mm thick. Slick becomes thinner as oil continues to spread further. Area spread of 1 ton oil spill can be as high as 12 square kilometers. During the first several days after the spill, a considerable amount transforms into gaseous phase. Slick gradually loses water soluble hydrocarbons as it stays longer. The remaining fraction, being viscous, reduces the slick spreading automatically. If we talk about the next stage, which is emulsification, oil emulsification in marine environment depends on its composition and the turbulent regime of the water mass. Most stable emulsions such as water in oil contain about 30 to 80% of water. Therefore, they can exist unfortunately in the marine environment for more than over 100 days. So the retention period in marine environment is very large and the spread is very fast. Emulsifiers help to stabilize oil emulsions and also promotes unfortunately the dispersion of oil to form microscopic droplets, and they stay for a longer time in the sea surface. If you look at the next state of oxidation and destruction, it involves petrochemical reactions under the influence of ultraviolet waves of the solar spectrum. The final products of oxidation are the following: it can form hydroperoxides, can form phenols, carboxylic acids, ketones, aldehydes and others. It usually has increased water solubility. The next problem is from sedimentation. Oil is also absorbed on the suspended material and deposits on the seabed. Oxidation process slows down under anaerobic conditions in the bottom environment in the seabed. Therefore, the heavy oil fractions accumulated inside the sediments can be preserved for a very long period, and that period can be as high as even many number of years. If you look at the next stage as microbial degradation, it is known species and fungi uses oil components to sustain the growth and metabolism for a longer time. Paraffin compounds biodegrade faster than aromatic and naphthenic substances. The aggregation process results in oil aggregates in the form of petroleum lumps and tar balls. They can be found in coastal waters and on beach side. They derive high fractions from crude oil after evaporation. Subsequently, they result in dissolution of lighter fractions, emulsification of oil residuals, chemicals and microbial transformation. Oil aggregates can exist several years in the open ocean. If we talk about self purification, oil rapidly loses its original property and disintegrates into hydrocarbon fractions in the marine environment. Their content gradually drops as a result of dispersion and degradation. Original and intermediate compounds disappear in due course of time. This can result in self purification, of course, if the toxic dose arise from this process does not exceed the acceptable limits. If you look at the effects of oil on marine organisms, population and ecosystems, complexity of oil composition and its behavior in water environment increases the uncertainty of data on the biological consequences of oil pollution. If we look at the toxic and threshold concentration of this in sea water, the toxic concentration of oil for eggs, larvae and young marine animals are considerably lower than that of adult organisms. The minimum acceptable level ranges from 10 power minus 2 to 10 power minus 1 milligram per liter. Any toxic level more than this will not allow the larva to mature into a mammal or a egg. The toxic and threshold concentration in bottom sediments at sea bottom or sea bed can be seen like this. The lethal effects on benthic organisms occur when the oil level in the bottom sediments are in the range of 1000 to 7000 milligram per kg. The sublethal effects will be caused when they are seen in concentration varying from 100 to 1000 milligram per kg. So, friends, any lethal effect will be resulting from a concentration of sediments seen at sea bottom as minimum as 100 milligram per kg to as high as 7000 milligram per kg, which are generally seen. But unfortunately, friends, the statistics show and the literature studies show that the sediment concentration on the seabed is much higher than these numbers shown in the slide. If you look at toxicity of oil and hydrocarbons for developing eggs as a result of 96R lethal concentration 50, we already know how to find out the lethal concentration 50 in the last module. We have explained you a logarithmic curve depending upon how one can estimate lethal concentration. If you look at the hydrocarbon contents like crude oil, naphthalene, xylenes and phenol, the lethal concentration in milligram per liter is seen in the screen now. Crude oil is seen to be very high as 24 milligram per liter, whereas the naphthalene concentration in hydrocarbon are seen as low as 1.25 milligram per liter. So, friends, in this lecture we have tried to understand what are the chemical composition, the biological content and the physical separation and different processes involved in hydrocarbon, how they can be separated and what are the different constituents present in hydrocarbons and what are the individual influences on oil spill as well as marine pollution. How do they affect physically, biologically the organisms present in sea water. We will talk about in detail about this in the next lecture. Thank you.